Welcome to Combos from the Couch by LifeStance Health, where leading mental health professionals help guide you on your journey to a healthier, more fulfilling life. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Combos from the Couch. I'm Nicolette Leanza, and joining me today is therapist Ed Collins. And we'll be talking about the unique mental health challenges that older men face. So welcome, Ed. Great to have you on.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here.
Men face increasing rates of depression and other mental health concerns as they age. And I'm glad we're having this conversation today about older men's mental health. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you to become a therapist.
I started off a career in retail management many years ago, worked for a lot of big box companies, ultimately ended up in store liquidation.
Hmm.
And as odd as it sounds, it headed me in this direction. I had a bachelor's degree in education, so came to a point my father became ill through other circumstances. My wife convinced me to go back to school, get my master's, got my master's in counseling. Liquidation led me in that direction because I was actively terminating all of these people's employment, and some had worked there for a long time. But instead of just saying goodbye, I felt obligated to try and find things for them to do. So there are a lot of these kind of conversations were happening way before I even got into counseling. But then once I started attending school, once I went back to school for the master's, everything just clicked. I was an overachiever. I had so many people during practicum. It was crazy, but yes, and thoroughly have always enjoyed the practice. Was out for a little bit, about 7 years, because I had two different forms of cancer back in 2013. That becomes another reason why I became very interested in working with older people, not just because of the fact that I am one, but that changed my perspective quite a bit. So when my chemo brain came back around to being fairly normal, I went back to work again. That's what brought me here.
My gosh, thank you for sharing all that, Ed.
Sure.
So, what unique mental health challenges do older men face compared to other demographics?
It's unique in that we have a society that was built up with all these structures that define what a man is in our culture. And I say unique because there's a big piece that is missing. The piece that is missing is what to do after you're no longer carrying the spear. You're no longer charging into the wilderness. You have to recognize at some point, and this is another side conversation with this, that the physical ability departs, and that plays on your mind, that you are now somehow viewing yourself as less than. So I think that's probably the major burden. When we look at relationships, how they change, unless we're willing to adapt to that change as we age, even your closest relationships become problematic.
Got you. That combination of not being as physically able to do things as you once did in your youth, also looking at the relationships to start to change. I can see where that would play in to some of those concerns. So, looking at traditional masculinity and how that interferes with older men's decisions to seek out help for their mental health, is that an issue?
Oh, it's a huge issue. It is so ingrained to be fearful of the new, to be protective. This is that guardian role that when we started to talk about therapy for men, I clearly remember when I started in the program many years ago that men were a rarity to see in therapy of any age. This generation, these new generations that have arisen, are much more likely to come in for therapy, but it was very hard to entice older men to, and very often they were pushed into it. It was given as an ultimatum by people that are close to them.
Right.
Thankfully, I am seeing somewhat of a transition now where I am seeing more people willing and active in therapy coming in to work with people. And to me, that's very encouraging because that fear model, that feeling your power, if you will, slip away from you, becoming more and more guarded about the world that surrounds us, and pulling those walls in as a form of self-protection, that becomes so stagnating, so deadly.
And I can see where that's going to definitely set a foundation potentially to be depressed, be anxious. If you become so stifled with your own guarded walls, of course
Mhm.
that's gonna I think that disconnection from others too is
Mhm.
gonna cause a problem.
Yeah, very definitely. And I see the breakdown in family structure that occurs with this because again, they become we, I should say we, it's not they, become mistrustful,
Mhm.
become again guarded, that we are protecting ourselves in the only way we know how, since we can't charge out there and confront life directly as we perhaps once did. Now, what do you do except to pull the wall in and say, if you don't come in, and we seize onto beliefs, we seize onto ideas and concepts as if we were the inventor of those concepts. We feel like we own this. And in truth, we don't. We don't own this at all.
That's funny. That's funny. So what strategies work best to engage reluctant older men in therapy?
In terms of what I use, I definitely have the conversation to start about the concept of this idea of going from a young man to a warrior to a tribal elder. That's the piece we miss. In every other culture in the world, that every other major culture that I can think of, there is some piece of this. I often use the example with men when I'm talking about this, about the life changes and what happens within a woman's life. So, starting off as a young girl, there's a transitional phase that's recognized within cultures, the quinceanera, the cotillion, the sweet 16. And all of these are a very definite period of time where a girl is changing into a young woman. There
Mm,
is a physiological change that
right.
accompanies these cultural changes.
Yes.
Then there is this perception of the next age group, which would be the childbearing years, whether or not the person chooses to have children, whether that's anything
Right.
in the thing. It's a
Right.
way that society then views them. Then you have this transition that goes into the matronly, the older woman, the grandmother. And again, with a physiological change that
Right.
accompanies it.
Right.
What do men have? How do these changes exist?
That's a good point.
Historically,
Right.
the transition from young man to man was war. If we look back at our history and we look back at our past, not so very far, my parents, my grandparents, that was definitely the transition that at that point in time, you signed up, you shipped out, you went to war. And if you didn't, you were viewed differently by society, regardless of what the reason might have been.
Mm.
So there was a transition, not that I'm applauding that, not that I think that's a good,
But of course, of
but
course.
there was this transition. Now we don't have a transition to become a man. We
Mm.
also don't have a transition to become an older man.
Good point.
Other societies, our Native American society in this country, the indigenous societies around the world very often have a position of the tribal elder. I look at the Asian traditions, I look at the respect that they have for these people. Now, one of the things I do counsel the men that I work with about being a tribal elder is you're not running off, grabbing people and bending their ear. You sit back and you allow them to come to you
Mm.
because they are there to learn from your wisdom that you've accumulated. And that's a whole different piece. So inviting them into that culture instead and making that transition mentally with yourself, saying, no, I can't carry the sword, but I can sit back here and carefully, intelligently advise.
Right. Which looking at those markers to the lack of markers of younger man to middle-aged man to older men, I think it makes me think of retirement, which is a marker probably for all of us, right? So if there's going to be a loose marker for older males, might be that retirement. So
Oh, yeah.
how does retirement and the health changes we talked about before specifically impact older men's mental health?
If you think about retirement specifically, not that many years ago, the retirement age was 62. The age of death of the average male within that structure was approximately 5 years after that.
Wow. Wow.
And then
Putting
it
that into
starts,
perspective is really interesting, right?
yeah, it starts to grow. So the insurance companies had actually considered this was built into those plans. When you reach retirement at 65, then 70. When you reach retirement at 67, just about where we're at right now. We're a little bit higher than that. 74, I think, is the number currently, but it's 72.
Yeah.
So these were the expected steps. It was an astonishment to see a man who was 90 years old. It was just an amazing thing. Not our world today. We are seeing many more people achieve greater ages. Now, many of the people strive to stay doing the same thing that they did their entire life. It's the ultimate version of the Peter principle. You can be an immensely successful person, and you will stay in that role and continue to advance in that role until you reach your maximum capacity. This is the same function that's happening with retired men, or men that should have been retired, pardon me, that are aging up to this stage.
Yeah.
They can't see from the inside view that their cognitive abilities have changed. Their physiological
Right.
ability may also have changed, which makes them force themselves to do things that they really probably should not be doing.
Oh my gosh. It makes me look at this from a different angle right there, for sure. Any other insights you'd like to share?
The change in that concept of who we are has to be started at an early enough age so it becomes something that we look forward to getting to. Right now, we live in a culture that very often mocks, criticizes, pokes fun at the boomers, the older people that exist in society. They would be very foolish to believe that same thing isn't going to happen to them if they allow it to happen to them.
I think just youth, assuming that's not going to happen to them. So that the foolery of youth is what's coming to mind. Good point there.
Gen A, that's a new one, I think. Gen
Gen
Alpha,
Alpha. Yeah. Yeah.
they're going to see this transition. If we could somehow get the message to them that this is all a natural, normal part of life, it's not something to be feared, that you will transition through life, you will become something different than what you think you are right now, but you have to accept that. You have to know that, because those people that are striving as hard as they can to stay as young as they can throughout their entire life cycle are missing the beauty of what can occur if you just embrace this. I'm the proud grandfather of 11 kids. I'm the
Wow.
proud great grandfather now of 2.
Wow.
And it is absolutely my delight to be with my great granddaughter who lives close to us. It's an amazing thing for me. I don't fight it, I don't fear it. This is just a life transition.
Oh my gosh. Love that. Kind of literally looking at it as like growing old gracefully, right?
Yeah,
Definitely.
yeah, yeah. And with intention.
Yeah, I love that too. Intention, with intention.
I have read much of Ram Dass's chronicling of his own death, which was fascinating. To watch the video, have read the books. I also did a little stint for a while as a hospice volunteer and was reading a lot of books about being a death doula. And it's fascinating work that we not only credit the fact that we age, but we have a plan for how we exit this life. And we hold on to that and we revere that and we make it very important. Instead of something to be feared, your life can be something to be celebrated.
Yeah, love that. And I think that's the key, our lives to be celebrated for
Mhm.
sure. Thank you, Ed. Thank you for sharing your insights and knowledge on this very important topic. Mm, I believe our listeners will definitely walk away with lots of good ideas of how they too can start to walk into our older adult years, we'll say, a little bit more intentionally and gracefully. So thank you.
Thank you for inviting me on.
I'd also like to thank the team behind the podcast, Jason Clayton and Juliana Whitten. Thank you for listening to Convos from the Couch. Take care, everyone.